Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's class, Blending Basics with Artist Loft alcohol-based markers. I'm your instructor, Adrienne Hodge, and tonight's class is part one of a two-part class where we'll be exploring alcohol-based markers. And we have used these Artist Loft alcohol-based markers a number of times in the past, but it has, well, I was about to say it's been a while, but we actually used them a few months back, not too much. We didn't do a bunch of blending with them, but we used them for a perspective studies class using a picture of a Polaroid box, and that was a lot of fun. So, anyway, tonight we will be getting into how to layer and blend these markers because anytime you have layering or blending in a work of art, you are technically painting, and alcohol-based markers or a lot of different types of markers that you might layer and blend, you really are painting. So you have to think about the process similar to the way you would the painting process. And that same thing goes for colored pencils, for chalk pastels. I learned that a number of years ago, and I've always found that to be an interesting fact because we tend to think of a lot of 2D dry media as being more drawing based, and it is drawing based. We are drawing, but we are painting because of the way that we're layering. So we'll talk about that a lot and how we can use combination of colors and stack and layer them on top of each other to blend them and to get different effects to happen. So we'll go ahead and switch to my tabletop view and go over supplies and we'll get started. Don't forget to tag your work with the hashtags Make It With Michaels or Michaels Classes. And there's actually another one, Learn with Michaels, that I need to add to my little post-it note here. Wherever you share your artwork online, and you can find me online by going to my link tree. It's spelled like that, link tree with a little period in between the TR and the EE. And then, but if you just Google Linktree and my name, Adrienne Hodge, it should come up and you'll find all the different stuff I have going on in person in Austin, Texas, and online virtually that you might join me for in addition. And also have a link to sign up for the next Michael's classes that are coming up. So check that out. And then here's some of my artwork from several years ago on my business cards. I use calligraphy ink in a lot of my art. All right, so we may have something that looks like this by the end of class number 2 next week. And in tonight's class, we are probably going to just have these two guys right here, this sketchbook page where we will study our flowers, zoom in, zoom out, talk about the best way to sketch before we layer the alcohol-based markers on there because they can be very transparent, so we don't want our pencil lines to show through. So we'll be working on a lot of drawing tonight, and then we'll be pulling out all the different colors that we'll be using out of the Artist Loft alcohol-based marker set and creating a little color palette here of all the colors that we see in our image. So tonight we'll be using the alcohol-based markers to do that, and then we'll see if we get started with the actual little studies here. But I've got my Artist Loft graphite pencils and Artist Loft eraser here. I've got the Artist Loft drawing pad. And then for the markers, so that's for our sketching, we'll be using the drawing pad. And then for what we're going to do with the markers, we'll be using this Artist Loft illustration pad paper. And actually, while I've got this here, I might as well do a little preview of what's coming up in March. We're going to be doing some fun graphite studies and pen and ink studies, value studies, using both graphite and then pen and ink of some lovely images of flowers that I included. So very flower-based classes here for the next several weeks. But I just happen to still have that at the front of my illustration pad. I'm going to pull that out, but I thought I would preview it before I put it away, before I forget. Okay, and then the last thing on the supply list is the reference photos, and I usually bring my iPad so that I can zoom in, but I forgot my iPad when I came to my studio today. So I'm going to use my phone, which is not super ideal, but you all have a copy of the reference photo on a PDF. When you signed up for the class, you should have had that PDF to download, and then Rich dropped it in the chat for you as well. So I maybe am not going to have it on screen just because it's not going to be that visible on the screen, and the light tends to mess up my graphite. But these are the images of peach blossoms on a peach blossom tree. Had to look it up and figure out what kind of tree this was. Not a cherry blossom, but a peach blossom. And I've got lots of really gorgeous photos that I zoomed in on some portraits that I took of using portrait mode. So it's nice and blurry in the background, but we're going to really get in here and study the the zoomed in version of this peach blossom, and also the zoomed out and the from a distance, kind of the impression of the peach blossoms. And then this one is a bit of a little abstract light study of maybe the inverted one here. So I've got the colored versions of the photos, true color, and then I've got black and white, and then I even made one sepia because I thought that looked cool and it was easier to focus on some of those light shapes in sepia. And then I inverted the image so that all of the light is dark and all of the dark is light. And I'll talk about this more as we get into it, why I think this is so important. But these are the reference images that I included, and that's what we will be doing in tonight's class, is delving into these images here and doing some studies of these flowers, getting a handle on the value and the light, because the light is telling us everything we need to know in our reference image when we are creating any work of art. So we'll really do some fun investigative studies of these images, and then we'll map out our color palette, and we'll see how far we get. If we have time to start on these more in-depth studies using the alcohol-based markers tonight, then we will. But if not, then we'll save that for next week. So we have plenty to do to cover these two classes across 3 hours here, because tonight's class is 90 minutes. Next week's class is also 90 minutes. All of my classes are 90 minutes. Not sure why I said it like that. Okay, so one unofficial supply that I didn't put on the supply list is a playing card or some kind of card. Sometimes I like to use a tarot card. I've even had one of my private lesson students used her phone recently, and I said, "Oh, that's fun." So you got the little rounded edges. I mean, you'll make a much longer rectangle if you do that. But for these little drawing studies that we're going to do, and for the alcohol-based marker studies, we're going to use a little card to create our thumbnail frames here. And that's a little trick that I borrowed from another art teacher friend of mine, Jenny Granberry, who used to teach at the art school at the Contemporary Austin with me, but she recently moved to Santa Fe. Anyway, she's on YouTube. If you look her up, Jenny Granberry. And that's a little trick that I learned from her, to use a business card or some kind of card like that. So I'll let you grab one of those. And while you're doing that, I'm gonna move some of this out of my way and get my fresh drawing pad ready here. I'm seeing a lot of comments in the chat about the reference photos. It seems that
Adrian, the link that I have, it's just for like I can download it, but I can't send that link. Is there any way that you can maybe pop it in the chat one more time for us?
yes, let me do that.
And
Oh,
then each person will be able to download them directly from that link.
I see. Okay, because I sent it to you before everybody joined.
Hmm.
I can also share the Google Drive document, but I know not everybody has access to that. So let me just get that.
Yeah, I was just fiddling with it to see if I could get it to send.
Okay, there's the PDF in the chat one more time, and then let me get the Google Drive link in case that's an issue for anybody who joins late, because I think whenever you join, you only have access to the chat up to the point where you joined, right? Is that wrong?
I believe so.
Yeah, this will be easier for you to share. And then I suppose for people watching later on YouTube, we need to ping the Michaels folks and make sure that that's going to be attached. But that ought to be a separate thing, I would think, when they add all that to the YouTube video. Okay. I'll read the link. Let me get back to the Zoom. I'm almost there. Radio silence moment. Okay, there we go. That ought to be easy for you to copy and paste now for latecomers. All right, so yeah, let me just get my fresh paper, and I got my sketching pencil and my playing card. Get this out of my way. There are just too many things on my desk right now. All right, here we go. I don't know if anybody noticed, but I got a new mat board, a big one for my little background, and I just really like it. I'm so excited about it. It's just the little things in life that bring us joy. Okay, so I am going to be using a heavier B pencil so that my lines show up on the screen, but you are welcome to use whatever pencil you prefer. I always recommend that folks use a nice light H pencil so that you can easily erase. And yes, I'm aware that my lines were showing up pretty light there. I'm going to try to draw darker than this. And I got some new things here to try to help with graphite on the screen. Let's see if I decrease my light, if that does makes it any better. I also got something that was supposed to like bounce the light back like a light box and make it a little easier to see graphite on Zoom, but doesn't seem to be making a huge difference. I will be sure to draw darker than this when I draw in my sketchbook here. But I want you to draw nice and light like this. I want your lines to be light so you can easily erase. So that's okay if you can't see that one. I'll make sure the ones that I draw here tonight are a lot darker than that. Okay, so, but like I said, you use a nice light H pencil so you can easily erase your lines. And as long as you keep light pressure on your pencil and don't press down on it too hard, you should, and just keep every line that you make on the surface of your paper, you should be able to erase pretty much anything. So we'll start out and just make 4 little thumbnails here. You could freehand these if you don't have a card to use like this. And I'm always trying to make things a little more presentable just for, aesthetic purposes, but these don't have to be perfect here. I'm saying that because I realized one of them is a little off center. So if yours are off center, just fine. Just making those a little darker. Okay. So the first thing I want to do is talk about the light and dark values that we're seeing in these images. And I want to do a couple where we zoom in here and really get a feel for these flowers as well. And actually, I might use more of a piece of just scratch drawing paper here so I can zoom in on a couple of these aspects a little more. So let's talk about the contour lines first. So contour lines are the lines that describe all of the surface of a form. And we have a cylinder here for this in this image of the peach blossom with the little stem sticking out with the flower. So the first image in that document, that's the one that I'm looking at. And I just want to talk about the contour lines of that stem because we have a cylinder. We've got and the cylinder is tube-like, so it's going to be curved on the horizontal axis. And it's going to be straight on the vertical axis. But since we are looking at not a perfect cylinder here, we're looking at something organic, there are a few little imperfect dips and curves happening where it kind of bulges out and then bulges back in. So it's not a perfect cylinder, it's more like that. And then I realized I don't have my preferred eraser here. I'm really stuck on my kneaded erasers recently, but don't have one on my desk. Okay, so we're looking for something that's a little more knobby like this on the outer edges, but then the horizontal axis, if it were standing straight up, would still be, I guess it's more of the vertical axis looking at it this way, are still very curved, right? So we're looking for something that's curved like this because it's tube-like and it's rounded, and then the vertical axis is going to kind of dip and curve with those dips and curves. So it's not going to be perfectly straight on the side. It's going to have these little ridges that stick out like that, right? Okay, so that's what I want you to notice about that image to start. And then we're going to look at the outer shape of the blossoms there and just draw the overall silhouetted shape that we're seeing. And if you're struggling with that shape, maybe you might scroll to one of the other images in the document, like this one that's a little more zoomed in, although we're looking at this particular blossom that has some petals sticking up in a specific way. So you might look at that shape in the inverted image as well, because then you can see more of the silhouette of it. And it might be kind of hard to see on my screen, but you should be able to see it in the document that you have. Okay, so we're just looking for that little petal that's sticking up, and then that imperfect rounded shape of the blossom that connects to that. So we're just looking for the outer shape of that blossom. And let's look at these other blossoms right here behind the stem. And we'll look for those outer shapes. We're just talking about the contours and the value here is what I want to get to next. But first, it's important to recognize those contours so that we can get things feeling nice and three-dimensional. Just looking for those outer shapes. So this is what you might draw in that small little thumbnail, but I just want to draw it bigger and nice and dark so that everybody could see it since we're having some problems seeing the paper. I didn't want to draw it too small. Okay, so now I want to look at the value shapes, the shapes of the shadows and the shapes of the light. But those value shapes are going to also follow the contours here. So first, I'm going to put in some of the darker shapes that I'm seeing on these flowers that are sort of in the back here, and they're a little blurry. So, which I think helps because maybe sometimes when there's too many details, we get a little stuck on the details. So I'm just drawing those organic, blurry shapes of light and dark that I see throughout the flower blossom. And they don't have to be perfect. They're kind of little rounded triangles, maybe little crescent moons, shapes. That's what you're looking for. And they don't have to be perfect because we're drawing something organic. Whenever I'm drawing anything organic, I like to remind myself it doesn't have to look like that peach blossom flower. It just has to look like a peach blossom flower, or maybe it doesn't even have to look like a peach blossom flower. Maybe it just has to look like a flower. So don't beat yourself up if it's not looking exactly like the image or exactly like the image in your mind that you're trying to capture, and just let whatever's happening on the page happen because we're just practicing art here tonight and nothing needs to be any sort of a way. And I always like to remind myself in a class like this where there are lots of different components, but the name of the class is something very specific. And the name of this class is Blending Basics in Artist Loft Alcohol-Based Markers. So that is our end game here. If by the end of part 2 next week, if you have learned how to blend alcohol-based markers, but you're still confused about how to draw a peach blossom flower, that's not my problem because I taught you how to blend the alcohol-based markers, and that's what I came here to do. Okay, just setting expectations for you all and for myself. So we got some little triangles here. And we got something very flower-like happening. And now I'm going to draw some contour lines on here as well. So overall, the entire flower is kind of sinking into itself in the center. If we want to think about like the center of an apple, or the contours of the inside of an apple, that's the thing that we're going for here, is this like radiating out from the center that's happening in the center of the flower. But then there's all these little petals that stick up in different ways, little crescent shapes and soft triangle shapes. But overall, we've got something like that, like a spider web there in the middle. So we want to keep that in mind because even as we're adding the markers, the more we can make our brush strokes, because we are going to be using the brush tips quite a bit, and the more we can guide our movements in a way that follow these contour lines, the more we will create the optical illusion of the peach blossoms. But then over here, when we do them more far away, we can draw them a little more blob-like, but still, even when we're doing that, just having that understanding of what the contours are doing. So these vertical lines kind of radiate out from the center, more like a spider web. And then any value that we see on the petals like this are going to follow on this axis, are going to follow the same curves as the rest of the petals. And if all of that is really confusing to you, don't worry about it. It's not going to affect your drawing that much. It will just make it that much more believable if you do have that understanding of the contour lines. Okay, so I think that's pretty good for zooming in on that. So now I'm going to draw that again. This time I'm going to leave everything empty and I'm not going to draw those contour lines this time. And I might zoom in on the image even more than I did in the marker drawing here. So I zoomed in quite a bit on the image where that particular flower was cut off, and it's more showing these ones that are behind the stem right there that are a little out of focus. So I may just draw it again that way, but I'm leaving those shapes nice and empty. And I'm really noticing the three-dimensional curve of some of those petals, but leaving them empty. And then I'll draw the stem. Same thing, I'm leaving it empty, but I'm keeping in mind all of that three-dimensional form that's happening there. And I really want to pay attention to this shadow that's falling on one side of the stem. Let me maybe zoom in on that and draw that again. So maybe I'll just draw it all nice and big and then draw it again in those little thumbnails. And if you want to start already sketching this on the illustration paper, you are welcome to. I just think it's always a good idea to sketch it out first in your sketchbook and get a good understanding of it before you do it on the final paper. But I know some people get impatient for the final product and maybe don't want to draw it two different times. But I'm looking for that shadow, and it's just going to be more believable if I make the shadow follow this uneven, imperfect edge. So that's why I wanted to talk about those contours so much. But I'm leaving this empty. I'm not filling it in with the graphite unless you just can't resist the urge to do that. And then I'm putting in some of these little knobby moments that happen and some of these imperfection moments as well on the stem, these little grooves and just moments of different texture and light that I'm seeing. And those are going to follow the contours on the stem. And we're going to fill those in with different colors. So we want to make sure that we have all these different three-dimensional shapes on there so that we can add green and brown and gray and black in a way that follow those curves and that makes it feel like a three-dimensional form. So that's what we're looking for on the stem. Oh my goodness, I keep misplacing things on my table surface. I don't know what happened to my eraser. Where could it have gone? Oh my goodness. Okay, maybe I just don't get to erase. I have another eraser over here. It's not an Artist Loft eraser, y'all. Excuse me. Oh my goodness. And then I'm accidentally drawing on my page. Okay, so that's what we're looking for, these empty shapes. And you can see why I wanted you to use a nice light H pencil, because if I have to erase with this B pencil, it's a little harder to erase. But I'm only using that so that you can see my lines on the paper. And I should mention that if you want more help with drawing these flowers, we have a number of classes in that playlist that Rich shared with you. I've done a lot of classes called Flower Fundamentals, and I considered doing a bit of a peach blossom flower fundamental class before this one that really goes into how to draw the peach blossom flower in great detail, like I've done with some other flowers. I've done datura flowers, roses. Um, let's see, there have been so many now. Hydrangeas. We did um, passion flower, orchids. And maybe the reason why I didn't want to do a whole flower fundamentals class on the peach blossom flower is because I feel like the peach blossom flower is very similar to two of those that we've already done. It's a little bit like an orchid and it's a little bit like a rose. So if you're struggling to draw the flowers, I see somebody just had a very spirited comment in the chat about the the class description, since I, just had that little disclaimer. I mean, obviously, we're walking through sketching these flowers together, but if you need a little bit more about how to draw the flowers themselves, then, if I'm not going into enough depth about how to draw these particular flowers, then definitely check out the Flower Fundamentals class on drawing a rose and maybe even the datura flower, although I think the orchid and the rose class would be the most helpful because these are very similar. We've got the petals that stack on top of each other in a way very similar to a rose. And then there's something about the way the petals are laid out that are a little soft. Well, I mean, rose petals are pretty soft too, but I don't know, maybe y'all can help me out. What is it about these that remind me of an orchid? And then what is it? Yeah, obviously, the way that the petals stack and radiate out from the center and create a bit of a spiral, especially when they're cupped, more cupped like this one. It feels more like a rose, and then it has elements that feels more like an orchid to me. But in both of those classes, I break down a rose and an orchid, zooming in, zooming out. I talk about all the contours, all the value. I mean, I really go in depth in those classes on how to draw the flowers. But these I wanted to be a little more impressionistic and loose so that we could talk about all these fun blending techniques. Okay, I'm gonna try not to get, looks like that person is over and out anyway, so glad y'all are on board. I saw a supportive comment just then. Okay, so we're just looking for the outer shape of these petals and that basic understanding of the three dimensions. But we want this to be kind of empty because we're going to be painting on top of it with our markers. So we really, I think the most detail is going to be on the stem. And then on these flowers in the background, just this understanding of these different value shapes, the dark and light value shapes. So you don't even have to sketch them that dark, especially if you're already on your illustration paper, then you can leave it super light so that your pencil lines don't get in the way. Okay, let's talk about this next one here where we zoom out.
Adrian, really
Yeah.
quickly, sorry to interrupt. Emily has a good question. She's wondering if she doesn't draw it in as zoomed in as you have, depending on how she zooms in, will one way be more difficult when it comes to working with the markers later on?
Yeah, I think you'll have more room to explore if you zoom in on that stem on at least one of them, because I'm going to talk about just the different colors on the stem here, and when we create our little palette, these are all the colors that we might use um, for the greenery and some of the background in these studies. So if you don't give yourself enough room to fill in with these colors, then that might be disappointing later in the class. But we'll also use some of those colors for the background. We'll do some little studies like this as well. We got a little scratch paper over here. I recommend you have a piece of your illustration paper for doing some testing out with the blending like that as well. All right, so yeah, let's get through the drawing aspect so we can get to all the fun color stuff. Let's see, oh wow, we're already almost 40 minutes in here. Okay, so this next one should be pretty quick because I want us to just capture the loose impressionistic feeling of these peach blossoms from a distance here. So with this one, I have a very impressionistic stem. So I just drew with my brown and my green and my black a little bit and just suggested the stem from a distance a little farther away there. So we definitely want a double-sided line here. So we have something to fill in, but you can let the line be fairly broken. I'll go over my lines and make them a little darker here as well, and just sketching it nice and light to get it the way I want it first. And then maybe you leave a little gap here and there, especially I meant to leave more of a gap right here so I can draw that one that we just zoomed in on before. That one right here. And then those two that we zoomed in on. And they can be more just blobby shapes now because we're zooming out and we're not looking at them very close up. So this time, this is where the idea of it doesn't have to look like that flower. We just want it to look like a flower comes in because we're not really too concerned with a study like this in making it look perfectly like the peach blossom, although it will definitely help on this one down here. This is like the one that the camera focused on the most in this photograph. So this one's a little bit more like a star shape. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. We're just looking for that rounded, maybe like a 12 pointed star almost happening there. And we can maybe come back to the details on that one after we zoom in on that particular flower for this one here. And I will sketch this out on paper as well and zoom in on it. I'm not going to leave y'all in the dark on drawing any of it. I'm just not going to go quite as in depth as I do in those flower fundamental classes. Okay, so just looking for the suggestion of these flowers at a distance and looking for some big and some small, some that feel really far away like they're diminishing in size, and then some that are at a medium distance, and then those few that are a little closer to us, etc. Okay, so that's all we're looking for with that one so far. And I'm going to go back to my scratch paper for this next bit. And I'm going to really zoom in here. So let's start with that big, well, we're not going to draw the outer shape of it. We're going to really zoom into the middle of it. Still just baffled at what I did with my other eraser. It's like, how did it just, oh my gosh, there it was. I picked up my illustration pad and it fell off. Okay, so we're gonna zoom in on this one. I'm gonna draw it nice and big, and then I'll draw it again in that little box. And it feels to me like a little alien here. There was one flower fundamental class a while back where somebody said in the chat all of the scientific names for the flower parts. And you'll have to forgive me again. I did not look up the flower part names, but these little pistils in the center feels like a little alien to me, or it kind of looks like a little candle stick or a match sticking up, but it's not a perfect cylinder. It gets a little more narrow at the top and it bulges out at the bottom. So at the very center, that's the shape that we're looking at. And then we've got these little wispy ones that come out like that. So you kind of use your whole arm movement and you want a very fluid, little flicky motion. Our class on drawing hair last week would be very helpful for getting these wispy little hair-like moments to stick out. And so we want those radiating out. I feel like so many flowers have this star-like situation going on in the middle. So any of those flower fundamental classes are going to talk about a pinwheel shape to start out with, going very general to specific with all of these flower shapes. But then we're looking for these little, I feel like little sprite or fairy sparkles happening at the end of them. They've got these little nodes at the end that stick out. So that's what we're looking for there. Yeah, that purple passion flower class was a fun one. We really got into the different flower parts. I learned a lot about the purple passion flower. Okay, and then looking at the value here, the dark to light, again, I see a little starburst pattern radiating out from the center where it's darker in the middle. And then it gets lighter as it goes out. But we've got all these overlays of different color. And this is why I wanted us to really zoom in so that we could get an understanding of all these different pinks that we're going to layer. It's not just pink. We're going to use some flesh colors and we're going to use some different pinks and some reds and some deep burgundy reds and then some lavender purple because where the light reflects on the peach blossom flower, we've got quite a bit of lavender purple, what I'm seeing. So if we layer, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but we're going to layer the lavender with the pink and we're going to get this rose violet here that I think is what shows up in the highlights of the flower in the photograph. So we just want to get some different shapes laid out in our sketch right now so that we leave them open and empty, but we're looking for these, trying to think what else to call these shapes, petal-like shapes. And again, we're looking for, I'm going to draw the contours. We're looking for this spider web pattern that radiates out like this. Just a little starburst pattern. And then on the outer, this axis, you can think about this action radiating out. So we're going to make our brush strokes follow these contours as we're filling them in. We're not just going to color straight across because that might make it feel flat. We're going to make our brush strokes follow this directional curve that the petal is following. And we're also going to use a little white gel pen as next week at the end to add some accents to all of this. I didn't mention the gel pen, I just realized in our supply list since we're not going to get to it tonight, but that gel pen can really add some fun accents. And I used the gel pen in some moments right here to suggest the curve of the flower a little more and to add the white on those. I'm gonna call them fairy sparkles because that's what they feel like to me. Okay, I'm gonna sketch that again, but this time it's all gonna be very empty shapes here. And my drawing behind is kind of getting in the way of this, but let me hold this up close to the screen. So it's gonna look something like that in order to fill it in with the markers and paint on top of it. We're basically looking for an underpainting. We're looking for the empty shapes that we're going to fill in with these colors. And we don't want our pencil lines to be too dark. So we want them to be nice and light when we sketch it on that illustration paper and sketch it like this, and big empty shapes going in the direction of these contour lines. So let me draw that one more time. Nice and dark here, all zoomed in. So I'm going to start with that big kind of bowling pin shape, bowling pin and a candlestick combined. And I don't need to draw every single one of these, just the ones that I would fill in with paint. So notice which ones would be filled in with that light pink in the photograph, and just have those shapes going like that. And then maybe start to look for those little triangle shapes for the dark shadows. And it's not a perfect star pattern. It shifts and gets larger and smaller in some different places. And then we're really zoomed in here at the middle. So kind of like a tongue. That's what I'm thinking. These petals feel like a tongue. So you're just looking for whatever part of those tongue shapes are visible, really zoomed in here in the center. So you're more looking for the shapes of the highlights is what you might put in here, like where there's some little triangular highlights on those petals. And that's what you want. And then you want those little circles, but we can add these circles back in with our white gel pen as well. We're just planning ahead because we're going to be painting with the markers over these drawings. Okay, and then in this last one here, I know it seems like a lot, but then two of them are more in depth than the other two. These two are very, very sketchy. So with this one, I'm going to look at the inverted light here. And this is going to be very abstracted. And I layered a lot of markers for this. Like it was almost ridiculous how many different layers I put on this particular one. Before I was satisfied. So this will be an interesting study for us all to see how we want to resolve this. We might make it a little more minimal than this time, but this definitely proves how much you can layer and paint with these markers and treat them more like you would paint. So that's fun. But with this one is to just draw the dark shapes that we're seeing. And if it makes more sense to you to draw the light shapes, then you do that. But we're basically just drawing the negative space. And I have a feeling this study is going to turn out differently than that example there. Because I maybe was pushing the markers to their limit the day that I planned this. And for full disclosure, because I'm just too honest of a person, it kind of got away from me. And I thought, do I have to redo this class? Do I have to redo all four of these because this one is just not acting right? And I FaceTimed my mom and I was like, all right, I'm not going to say anything about my opinion. I'm like, Mom, how does this look? And she's like, that looks great. And I'm like, nothing about this stands out and looks weird. And she said, no, it looks awesome. And I'm like, all right, cool, then I'm done. Anyway, we'll do this a little differently. It got away from me, I'll be honest, but maybe it's kind of good sometimes. People tell me that in my in-person classes when I quote unquote screw up when I'm demonstrating something. They're like, "No, it's actually really good to see you mess up a little bit because it makes it more okay for a student to mess up, or you kind of see what not to do." So that was the other reason I thought it was good to leave that one in there because it shows a number of things. First, it shows, yeah, just maybe what not to do to have a better plan. I don't know what I thought was going to happen with the first few layers, but the other thing that it proves that other than it's okay to mess up and be exploratory, is that you can really layer these markers quite a bit and they're not going to mess up the paper and they're not going to, because they are not water media. If it was, watercolor or something like that, or something, a wet medium, then it might mess up the paper. But even when I flip it over, you can see that one definitely has more layers than the others, but it didn't bleed through that paper. So it just shows the high quality of this paper and the quality of these markers. All right, so yeah, just very lava lamp, fractal, interesting light study here. That's what we're looking for. Okay, so that is it for the drawing part of the class. Well, not completely because we're going to sketch it again on our final paper, but before we do that, I want to talk about all these colors. And we've got 35 minutes left in the class to talk about layering and blending basics of the alcohol-based markers. And then we'll sketch it again on our final paper, on the illustration paper, and see how far we can get with that tonight. And yeah, I do recommend having another piece of scratch paper here off to the side so that you can do a little bit of scribbly, fun sketching with the markers just to see how blending these colors would translate to creating those flower shapes. Uh, Bob is asking, can I hold up the color with the numbers? Sure, I will do that as we go along here. So make some room again. I got my illustration paper out for this because we want to test the markers out on this particular paper. Okay, so the first one is, yeah, have your pencil handy as well so that we can label those colors as we go. So the first one is our lavender, and it is V5, V is in Victor. And there is the chisel tip on one side of these markers and then the brush tip on the other end. And I'm going to use the brush tip. You're welcome to use the chisel tip if you prefer. Oh, and I see Rich is going to drop that and each number in the chat for us as well. So that'll be helpful. So I'm going to draw a little swatch, really thinking about the painting process here. So I'm going to draw a little rectangle and fill it in. So that's V5, the lavender. And then R19 is the next one. And that's the garnet. My kids are obsessed with a show called Steven Universe. It's all different gems and garnet, amethyst, and pearl. And a lot of these markers have the names of gems on them. So we've got garnet here, R19.
What's the number on that one, Adrian?
R19, R as in rich, 19. Okay, and then the next one is R18. I questioned my usage of these reds at first, but once I got in there, I do think the red layering these reds with the garnet and the pinks, it really gives more dimension to this black, this dark value that we're looking for at the center of the peach blossom. So it may seem like, especially don't judge these colors by the color on the tip of the marker. They look different on the page, like with a lot of paint. So this is R18.
What's the color name of that one?
Oh, sorry, that was, oh, it's kind of rubbed off. I don't know. It rubbed off of the tip and it's not on the outside of the marker. It's very like fire engine red, like lipstick red. I can't help but think I don't have to say every thought that pops into my head for like nail polish colors. Like, I'm not a waitress. That's my favorite red. Red name for a red nail polish. All right, R12. This one's poppy red. So yeah, R18 is a little, it's not so much. This poppy red is definitely more of like a fire engine red. R18, I would say, was more in
Barbara
between.
said that your unknown R18 is crimson.
Oh, crimson. Okay, great.
Thanks, Barbara.
Thank you, Barbara. All right, and then R12 is poppy red. And then we're looking for R6, another one that looks so different on the paper compared to the tip. This is Coral Reef R6. I feel like I'm calling out bingo numbers. You can see now why I wanted two parts to this class, because all this just talking about the colors is so time consuming and it's nice to take our time with it. The next one is R3 Peony. Bumped my camera, pulling that lid off. R3 Peony. Pony with an E at the front. The R3. And then R2. Where's my R2? That's blush. And then YR14. 14. That one, I know I pulled it out. Here it is. This is powder. This one's gonna get a lot of mileage. I get a lot of mileage out of this YR14. So keep that one nice and handy. Because this flesh color is, we're going to pair this flesh color with our pinks to get, so both of these flesh colors will be very helpful. YR14, and then the next one is YR5.
I think I missed the last one, Adrian. Sorry, I was responding to someone.
Oh, okay. It's YR14 was the last one, and that was powder. And then the next one is YR5, and that's light peach. So those are all the colors that you may potentially use for the peach blossoms. And you may gravitate more towards some than others. Some of them might be more just highlight colors. And we definitely are going to use some in particular more than others. That's why I separated them up here. But first, I want to talk about those earth tones for the stem. Even though I know that's minimal, it creates some visual contrast in our studies here. So for those, felt like I was about to sneeze, but it did. But there it is. Um, okay, so for the greens, we've got BG8, and that one is just labeled green. Go up instead of to the side here. So BG, big green 8. That's what the BG could stand for. And BG7. And if you wanted to zoom in on a different part of one of these photos, you might use more of these colors. I'm looking at my studies and thinking, I really didn't use too much of these greens, but they're in there a little bit. So this is BG7, it's the mantis green. The other one was just green. So BG7, and then E18.
What was that first letter?
E as in elephant. I thought I had pulled that one out, but I'm not seeing it on my desk. Give me just a second. Okay, yeah, that's the coffee brown. It looks like it's gonna be black, but it's the coffee brown. Or it's just coffee is what it's labeled. So we're actually not going to use black. It's just going to, this coffee color is going to look black because it's our darkest color. Because slate black is not a color that occurs in nature. So using deep dark brown or maybe purple or maybe dark blue and brown together to get something that feels like black is always going to be a little more convincing and not quite as stand out in a painting or color study. All right, and then N6 is our neutral gray. And if you don't have this particular gray, whatever gray you have will work fine. I had a set of grayscale Artist Loft markers that have disappeared. I need to purchase those again, I believe, because I don't know what happened to them, but I think maybe this gray is from that set. So if you have a different gray in your set here, whatever gray you have, should work fine because really I just wanted to use it for some background here, and a lighter gray actually might be better. So if you have a lighter gray, feel free to use that instead. And then I squeezed in E6 here as well, which is hazelnut. I put it on the bottom down here, like kind of added it after the fact. So we might go ahead and put that in here now so that we're kind of going in order from with our colors a little bit more. Although this probably could have come after the coffee, would have made more sense, but that's okay. So that's E6, it's the hazelnut. Anybody getting craving for coffee now from all these coffee flavors? And then E17 is the next one. That is praline. I find this very useful to do anytime I'm about to start a painting. Those of you who come to a lot of these classes know that I love setting up a palette beforehand for a couple of different reasons. One, I think it's just very satisfying and looks nice on the page and makes you feel good about life. And isn't that the reason we all make art in the first place? And the other reason is because you get a feel for what all these colors are, and then what we're about to do next is very essential to our process with this is seeing how they overlap and blend together. Okay, so the next one after praline E17 is B1. It's the pastel blue, and this is a perfect example of one that looks completely different on the page when it dries. These also look different wet versus dry. It doesn't take very long for them to dry, but you can see as you're laying down some of these colors, they look different and surprising as you're making your first mark with them, but then when they dry, they look even different than they did before. And then when we start to layer them, they're going to look even more different. And then the last one here is BG13, and that is seafoam. That's another one that looks very different on the page than it does on the marker. And this is a really pale, pale green. And this one's going to get quite a bit of mileage too, especially if you wanted to zoom out a little more on these images that I shared with you. I feel like you would use this seafoam green for a lot of the.
What color was your E17 again? It's a little bit hard to hear, Adrian.
Oh yeah, it was praline. Okay, so those are all the colors. Quite a few of them. And we're definitely going to layer more than just these three sets, but I just want to show you these, and then we'll do a little bit of practice sketching with them on our scratch paper over here, and then we'll see how much time we have left. We have 20 minutes right now, so okay, so let's take our V5, which is the lavender, and our R3, which was the peony. So lavender and peony. I'm going to do this little math equation here. So we're going to take V5 and R3, and they're going to equal, we're going to do V5 plus R3, and then we'll layer them together. Okay, so it's always good to start with the lighter color first and then add the darker color on top, or add the, slowly introduce the darker color. And in painting, same thing, if you start with your trying to make a pink, you want to start with your white, slowly add red, Otherwise, if you take red and add white to it, it's just going to overtake it. And it does depend on what type of color you're trying to get, because if you're trying to get darker, then we're going to start with, well, even with those two, we're going to start with the lighter one. And it might be kind of hard to tell what's the lighter one. So the question I like to ask myself is, which one appears more dominant? And maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like the lavender is a little less dominant. Maybe it is more dominant. I don't know. We'll see. You can do it both ways. You can start with the purple, with the lavender, and then add the peony on top. Let's do it both ways. Let's just see, because now I'm questioning myself. Let's start with, okay, so just do a little swatch of the lavender. Do a swatch of the peony. And then we'll layer our peony on top of the lavender. And then, yeah, watch how when it dries, it really starts to bleed and spread into itself. And like those streaks that maybe show up whenever it's wet, they tend to disappear. And you just get more of this uniform version, as the alcohol in them dries, I suppose, they kind of bleed into themselves and blend. And then if your set has the blender in it, so I have it's N1 is the blender, you can add the blender on top. And the class where I really got into blending with these before, it was quite a while back. I want to say I've been doing these classes for 3.5 years. It was 3 years ago. It was about this time, 3 years ago. And it was the class was one of those really long class titles. We were illustrating a vegetable or fruit. So we created a character out of a vegetable or a fruit. So if you put in the Google search, I don't know if that one will be on that playlist, the alcohol-based markers, my name, and character, the keyword character. So I had a sweet potato and I turned it into a fun little, with like a little whale with a sprout coming out of it. It was so cute. And then some other people, oh man, the student examples from that class just blew me away. Like I remember kind of a French tomato character. Oh, so adorable. The people who worked on uh, those little character illustrations with me were just brought their A game. People sent me emails later with their characters. So fun. Anyway, we used the blender in that class quite a bit, and with any type of material that comes with a blender like this, markers or colored pencils, it's good to wait until you're totally done to add the blender, because like let's just do a little test over here to the side. It's just basically what it's doing is it's making the colors bleed together even more and blend. So it makes them even more uniform. And I'm still on the screen. Yes. Okay. Just once you use the blender, I think it kind of makes it hard to add details. So the blender's kind of the last thing that you want to do. You don't want to just blend over everything constantly, but it is very helpful if you have it. I'm just going to use the blender on there now. So see, it just kind of makes the streaks disappear because I used a lot of visible streaks there. And then as it's blending, it's just, as it's drying, you can see those streaks are going away and it's just becoming more spread out together there. So that's what the blender will do. Okay, so the next two colors that I want to layer together are Y14 and R3. And definitely our Y14 is lighter. That's the powder color. This is the one I said we were going to get a lot of mileage out of because uh, it's sort of the base layer for the peach blossoms, this flesh color. Putting it underneath the pink is really going to give that pink the dimension that we're looking for here. So Y14 plus R3. Where'd it go? Just had it. It's our peony again. So yeah, as those colors mix together, then we're really going to get that particular bright fluorescent feeling pink to happen because the pink by itself just doesn't quite have that dimension we're looking for. So I feel like layering those two really makes that happen. And if you want to take the time to use these more Caucasian skin tone colors, the YR5 and YR14, and maybe the R2. Uh, well, the R2's kind of got a little pink to it. That's the coral reef, I believe, right? No, I can't remember what R2 was. Should be somewhere in front of me. Was that the It's one of those, it's deceptive. Oh yeah, the blush. So it does have more of a pink to it. But anyway, if you want to start with those flesh colors and do this for all of them, we don't have time to go through and do them all together. Just see how they all layer on top of each other. See what different kinds of pinks you might get. You might like some of those better because I never want anybody to feel like they have to do exactly what I do in the class. If you want to change the colors slightly or blend them in a different way in your studies or zoom out or zoom in more on those images that I shared with you again, please feel free to choose your own adventure.
Quick question, Adrian. Emily's just kind of playing around with the markers and the paper, and she's wondering her markers aren't layering correctly. Could it be her paper, or do you have any tips when it comes to the markers and layering?
What paper are you using, Emily? You're using a different brand and they aren't layering at all. Or they aren't layering well. Um, yeah, I don't know. They're different alcohol-based markers, a different brand, and I guess we'll wait for your reply, see what kind of paper and markers you're using. 'Cause yeah, that coated marker paper is best, is what Hallie's saying. Yeah, the illustration paper, it comes with either this vellum, Bristol vellum, or then it comes like more smooth as well, and both types of illustration paper, Bristol paper, or Jennifer, get the ones with vodka instead of tequila. Um, Yeah, or mixed media paper maybe might work if you had mixed media paper but didn't have the Bristol paper. But yeah, paper definitely makes a difference. If I was to do this on the sketchbook paper, it's definitely not gonna handle it the same as the illustration paper. Okay, so I just put down the R19 and now I'm doing the N6. So we're layering these darker colors. So this is again why we don't need black, because we want our dark values, we want those to come across with more dimension to them. So by layering this dark red with a gray, we should get a nice deep dark red that feels almost black. Just remembered we also did a class where I drew dried roses, little dried roses studies with the alcohol-based markers a while back. I feel like that one was maybe 2.5 years ago. And that was, we used a lot of these reds and grays, a lot of these same colors actually for those dried rose studies. Those were really fun. Okay, so now let's do just a little bit of our flower studying. We got 6 minutes left here. I just want to start to play around with how we're going to layer these and get this painted effect. So I want to think about working from the background forward, working our way from the background forward, and think about going from light to dark and the direction of our lines. Okay, so let's just put these into action. I kind of already did it a little bit, but then I blended over that. But let's use the YR14. I realized I labeled that one wrong right there. YR14. And just start to sketch. We don't even have to draw it in pencil first, but just on some extra piece of your illustration paper, just start to sketch that little tongue shape of some of a petal. And in some of the places where you're seeing a lighter pink, look at those particular shapes. And just getting a feel for how we can start to make these flowers happen. So thinking about those contour lines, the directional flow of our lines. And this is just a little lower risk way to study our flowers. Maybe let the pink be by itself a little bit. And then lay it on top of that YR14 as well. Honestly, I'm not worried about making it look exactly like the flowers here. I just want us to play around a little bit with these last few minutes and layer some of these. So I'm going to use the R6, the coral reef, on top of it now and see what happens if I add that third color and how that affects those colors, or if I just add it in the place where just the pink is. So again, not even looking at the photograph right now. I'm just playing around, getting experimental, noticing how these colors can layer together. Let's bring some of that dark red in there, that R19, the garnet. So with this one, I'm kind of drawing like some little hatching lines. But that's 4 colors in some places right here, and you can really see the multi-dimension that starts to happen when you layer that many colors as opposed to how that color looks by itself. And then if you had the blender and you wanted to add the blender on top and see how that might, I think this is just me, it's just my opinion. I used to have a t-shirt that said, I heart my opinions. We all love our opinions, right? But they're opinions, they're not facts. Uh, I feel like sometimes these blending tools like tortillions and the blender and these sets, like it kind of takes away from it a little bit. Um, so I think I kind of like how they blend just layering on top of each other. I feel like the blender kind of blurs things in a way that I'm not super into, but that is just me. All right, we got 2 minutes left here. I see some people are ducking out already. Okay, let's see. The last thing I want to talk about before we go is just how you might use contrasting colors to bring these flowers forward by adding the greens and the browns in the background. But I think I'll save that for next time since we are almost out of time here. So that is it. We covered a lot of ground. I wish that one person who got fussy had not have left because I feel like they would have loved all the information I shared. We talked about a lot of stuff, and hopefully y'all can see why I didn't want to spend a whole hour on the drawing because then I don't know. 3 classes I think is too much for peach blossom flowers. I think we'd be sick of them if we did 3 parts. Uh, thank you, Jennifer, for that wonderful feedback, and thank you, Rich, as well. Would y'all like to hold up any of your studies? Maybe you have some lovely little experiments that were happening that you want to share, even if you want to just share your color palettes or your sketches. I'd love to see them. There's Sarah. Yeah, that looks great, Sarah. Let me see that color palette. That's looking good. Oh, I love how nice and big you made all your swatches. Beautiful. Anybody else? Oh, Sarah, you were the only brave soul so far. Thank you for sharing. Well, it was one of those classes where we're doing a lot of studying and there maybe wasn't too much to share so far. All right, so yeah, next week we will just forge on doing more practice of blending the colors where we left off, and then we'll sketch again on that illustration paper and start these more blended little painting studies with the markers. And I don't believe you're automatically signed up for the next part. I think you have to go in and sign up for the next part. And Rich just dropped the link to sign up on the Michaels website for next week's class. And yes, happy Valentine's Day to everyone, especially the single people. I'm bringing candy to all my students tomorrow and the next day. All my students are my Valentines. I would share some candy with y'all if I could see you in person. All right. Thank y'all. Have a great rest of your week. See you next time. Good night.